The objective today is to manipulate user-generated string input to generate dynamic output. So let's start with the warm-up. We've been learning code, and I like to take this in baby steps. The first line of our code says 5 more. This is clearly a function call. The function is down here, and it's named 5 more. What happens when you call the function is the variable x is going to get 5, an integer, right? So then the fifth line of code is going to assign variable y 3 plus x, essentially saying 3 plus 5, which is 8. So when I log what y is equal to, the answer should be you pick A, B, C, D, or E. And basically what I just did for you as I walked through this is I gave a type of narration, or I was trying to do some mental code just in my mind, remembering what x was equal to, kind of like mental math. And since it's JavaScript, I'm calling it mental interpreting, since it's an interpreted language, which is different than a compiled language. We'll learn more about that later. For now, the event-driven apps you have created responded to the user clicking an element or typing a number when used prompt num, which is the name of a special built-in function, right? So what if we want the user to provide text instead of a number? In programming, we have to represent text in a specific way to distinguish it from other words in our code, such as variable names. The primary data type we have used so far is numbers. If we want to interact with user-submitted text, however, we'll need to learn about a new data type called a string. Now, the string is a sequence of ASCII characters. So, what did I just say a string is? Now you can store strings in a variable just like a number. In this example, the variable name is str, but you could choose a name that is descriptive and meaningful to you. Combining strings. Often you'll want to combine multiple strings to create one longer string, and you can do this with the plus operator. The formal name of this process is concatenation. So now tell me what concatenation means. Moving on, you may have noticed that the strings we've seen are wrapped in double quotes. These double quotes are part of the string. This is how you indicate that a sequence of characters is a string and not the name of a variable. So as you start writing programs with strings, it is common to generate errors from forgetting to place them in double quotes, and we're going to generate some of these errors now so that you can recognize them more easily later. You'll think right share on these 4 lines of code what's going on or what's wrong with line 3 and 4. So like I said before, so far we've been using prompt num as a simple way to get a number as input. Now that we know a little about strings, we're going to create a user interface that users can use to submit text, that is strings, instead. So the first and simplest example is text input, which you can find in design mode. And you can follow the link here. I'll paste it on Canvas for everyone else. But once you're there and in design mode, you drag and dropped that text input, you'll give it a name, such as name input, and then go back to your code. Then in the code, you can do a console.log to print out what the person wrote into it. So to follow the command strictly here, console.log will tell the interpreter to go get text from an element called name input, and once it has that, your app will write whatever the name was that the user typed in. As we saw, a user can now type inside of a text input whenever they want, but now we'll need a way to access that text. In order to do that, we'll need to use the getText command, which you can now find in the UI Controls tab. You can use a getText command just like a string within a console.log, or write command. Just like with setText, you'll refer to the UI element by its ID name. So here's that same code again. My think right share on this slide is, what is the name input in this context? So I'm asking you to tell me whether it's an integer, a string, is it an ID, is it a function, is it a variable, which one of those things is it? So a quick follow-up think right share, what does getText and setText do? And I'm giving you a hint here, read the documentation on AppLab. And if you don't know where that is, I'll show you right here. All you have to do with your mouse is hover over something, and this in blue is the documentation. So right here it says button parenthesis ID text closed parenthesis creates a button on the screen displaying the text provided and referenced by the given ID. So there's the documentation. So your next think right share here is what will happen when this code below executes. If you got stuck on that last one, go ahead and listen to my narration here. Basically, when I click something called Submit button, a function will begin where a variable named username will get something that a user had typed into an ID called name input. And then a variable called user age will get something that a user types into another box, probably a number, but whatever they type into here will be assigned the variable called user age. So then in my console, I can log out what the username was and their age. So with that said, if you want to go back here and answer the last Think Right Share, go ahead and do that. What I'm thinking is when we, as in teachers, teach you the importance of annotating text like a book or printed piece of paper, I think annotating code is a great way to learn as well. So here's an optional one. If this is definitely a learning style of yours, go ahead and write out the code and then circle the element ID. Maybe put a box around the string literal and a triangle around the variables. Or if there's some way for you to do this on Canvas, that would be interesting to see. It says here, so far we've been outputting our messages to the console, but now we'd like to display them in the app. So in order to do so, we're going to be using a new UI element called a text area. So you can use set text with a text area just like you would with the text label. If we want to combine user input with default text, we can do so with string concatenation. Together with the text area, we can use this ability to compose longer messages based on user input. Your Think Right Share, what apps do you have on your phone that accept strings and output strings? So if you want to change the capitalization of a string, you can do so with two new functions, and you wouldn't be typing str.to uppercase. You would type the name of the thing that you want to be changed into an uppercase. So maybe username, that variable, you could do username.to uppercase, and that'll take the whole name and make every character an uppercase character. Here's an extra credit question for you. What do you think could go into the parameter in such a scenario? Note that the syntax is similar to console.log. This is because to uppercase really only makes sense as a command when you are using a string, just as log only makes sense when you are talking about the console. This function evaluates to a new string in which all characters have been made uppercase and lowercase. If you want to update the value in your original variable, you'll have to do so explicitly. So here's my example. Var myString gets lowercase for now, and then you would take this variable called myString and assign it a function that will make all the letters uppercase. When figuring out how to make progress with a program, it helps to break the problem down into smaller steps and test your program incrementally. So rather than jumping straight to getting the user input and concatenating it with your Mad Libs outline, start first by just making sure that you can get your Mad Libs outline to appear in the text area when the next button is clicked on the first screen. So there's that code right there, plural noun dot to lowercase. But wait, if you just use set text and pass in the string of your Mad Libs outline, it'll look like the screen on the right where all the steps are smushed together. You can use one or more new line characters, that is quotation mark \n, end quotation mark, in your string to create a line break in your text. And if you want to play around with this, here's the link. But my Think Right Share here is just what can you type in a string to go to a new line. Remember that the decision to create local variables or global variables is a question of scope. Where will you need to access these variables in your program? If you're only using the variables in the click callback function for the next button, then they can be local. On top of that, you're going to mix up variable names with UI IDs. Just be patient, try to debug with joy, and maybe even get some nice headphones to wear and listen to smooth jazz while coding like I do. You'll get frustrated, but the reward of when the code works is worth the frustration. You may clap your hands and jump up in class and make a ruckus when you feel like celebrating your code. Okay, 2 more Think Right Shares and we're done. So this is just a simple concept of things you can put inside quotes, including nothing. So your Think Right Share, though all these strings above look different, what is the one similarity between them all? And your last Think Right Share, looking at the sample code below, what is the difference between the 3 examples of string concatenation? And just so you know, these 3 will all output the exact same string. So with that said, we're at the end of the lesson, so pick a IB attribute to connect to today's learning. My DOL, be careful not to confuse IDs with strings here. Now given the code below, let's say I typed in Carl, what will be displayed in my text box that I named text1? And I'm offering extra credit here if you don't call me out for my mistakes. I left out a curly bracket somewhere.